That brings us to item number 8, ACR 92. Mr. Gibson.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. I want to start off by thanking you very much for giving me this opportunity to present Concurrence Resolution 92, which recognized the 50th anniversary of the Watts Revolt, which originally took place in August of 1965. I was not born, but I was born and raised in Watts, where this actually took place. This historic event commemorates in the greatest of Los Angeles, the Watts community, which is close and adjacent to Compton, involved 6 days of protests that resulted in 34 deaths, 1,032 injured, and over $40 million in property damage during that particular time. But it must be noted that the Watts Revolt was one of the many uprisings during that time. The year before, 8 separate incidents of our society was unrest during that time in our nation. Cities that include Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, and Jersey City. So, keeping in and putting in its proper context regarding the Watts Revolt, we have to understand that it was symptomatic of the chronic problem of injustice and discrimination that plagued the entire country during that time. Let me be clear by saying we do not celebrate riots, nor are we advocating for violence in any shape, form, or fashion. This resolution will seek to rewrite the narrative of civil unrest by addressing the foundation of injustice that led to the revolt and also celebrate the peaceful triumph that came out of the revolt that took place in August of 1965. With the recent events of the unrest in the city of Baltimore, burning, shootings of black churches, we cannot shy away from this conversation of those who fail to learn from the lessons of the past are doomed to repeat them themselves. Given the magnitude of the Watts Revolt and the impact it has had on the state and our nation, I am asking that this body support us carrying forth this conversation and moving the dream that Dr. Martin Luther King fought and died for. As I close, a young man such as myself who grew up in this community, I heard about what transpired and the devastation that took place as a result of it. And this, again, rewrites the narrative to talk about a celebration in this community so that we will not forget the past, that we will move forward with the future to making sure that we will not repeat what has transpired, but also moving to a great prosperity in the community. Here today to provide supporting testimony is Mr. Tim Watkins, the president of what we call the WOCAC, which is the Watts Labor Community Action Committee, who will also represent his organization that came out of the revolt that took place in Watts. I would simply say, as a young man growing up, his family owned a store right around the corner. He lived 2 blocks. I never knew him, but lived 2 blocks from where I grew up. And his store was certainly a beacon for all during the Watts Revolt to go and buy groceries and things of that nature. I remember his brother. I would go to the store and get 50 cents worth of bologna and cheese for field trips, getting ready to go to, at that time, Marineland. But his organization stands as a testimony of the community in terms of how far we've come, but yet still how far we have to go. So, Mr. Tim Watkins.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Mr. Watkins.
Thank you. So I've been involved in the Watts Labor Community Action Committee for the entire length of its existence, 50 years. We celebrate dual anniversaries this year with the community of Watts. And I see before me a resolution that seeks to heal one part of that travesty. That 34 people perished in that revolt, most of them shot by officers in the line of duty. And, you know, it suggests that there was no potential there, that these were rioters, that these were people without value, to simply allow them to languish for 50 years without an acknowledgement that every human being is rich with potential, and that we lost those 34 members of our community at a time when the country was grappling with the problem of injustice. WLCAC came out of the so-called war on poverty. We're the only organization of our kind that still exists in America today. There were many organizations that were formed, but WLCAC has consistently sought to respond to the problems that existed in Watts in 1965, and we deliver every day a huge array of services to homeless, senior citizens, at-risk youth, people that are seeking work and looking for job opportunities. And we do that in the spirit of not only responding to the need, but to the idea that people are hopeful. People remain resilient. People remain hopeful in Watts. And the people of Watts are actually ready to move forward. And so this resolution paves the way for Watts to take its place in what I would consider to be new light, that we're closing one small part of that book in history, that chapter that deals with those 34 lives. So I would urge an aye vote on this resolution, and would be very grateful if we could carry that back to Watts as a beacon of hope.
Thank you, sir. Additional witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition. Seeing none, let's come back to the committee. Moved and seconded. All right, I'll bite. Ms. Gallagher, you? Okay.
Yeah,
Ms. Gallagher.
if you want to follow. But, you know, I get where you're coming with this, Assemblymember Gibson. I guess some of my concern here is that I certainly don't deny at all that racial tension played a substantial factor in all of this, but I think to just focus on that issue and almost kind of commemorate, and then you brought up Baltimore, and I think that, you know, I think most people look at this agree that none of these were the correct response to racial discrimination and inequalities that we're seeing in society. I think even Martin Luther King, who you referenced, and who is referenced in there, his quote basically says, I advocate for nonviolent action in response to these things. To almost commemorate and celebrate that as what happened in the riots and then what happened in Baltimore as almost maybe a correct response, which I don't think it is. I have some discomfort in sort of doing that. Do we need to have a conversation about race and those tensions that we're discussing? Yes, we do. But I feel like this resolution is almost, you know, more one-sided and almost kind of celebrating this as a rational and correct response to something that I don't think is really, I don't agree with that. So, I mean, those are my concerns, and I don't know, maybe you can address some of those in response.
Sure. Thank you very much. We appreciate you sharing your concerns. What transpired in Watts was a people whose voices were not heard. And it came out of an abundance of people's frustration. But the good that came out of that, if you can find some good, and let me talk about the good, it invoked Dr. Martin Luther King coming down to Watts at the behest of Supervisor Kenny Hahn, whose son was the former mayor of the city of Los Angeles and daughter was on the city council. Now she's a member of Congress. What birthed out of that that situation, the revolt, was Martin Luther King Hospital being erected and saving lives. It became one of the world famous trauma center, although it had problems. But it was a place where individual interns who were becoming doctors became one of the world-renowned surgeons. What came out of that civil situation was Cal State University Dominguez Hills, that was located in a very affluent community of Palos Verdes, moved to Carson, where I served 10 years. What came out of that was a conversation about how we should confront and have real conversation. This resolution seeks to, one, to celebrate the 50th anniversary, but also talks about 34 individuals who were innocent, who were not part of any civil unrest, 34 individuals who lost their lives, innocent bystanders. It also indicates a situation where we should never find ourselves as a society to allow people not to have a conversation about issues or injustices that exist in our community. What this does is forces a conversation. It brings us all together to talk about what has transpired in the past, but why we should always remember how we should work together to look forward towards a bright future. And as I indicated with Tim Watkins, with his father, who not only walked with presidents of the United States who've come down to the community of Watts and embraced and brought resources to Watts so that people would not have to have the frustration. What also transpired out of this civil unrest or the revolt was a community, a police commission, a mayor that was had sensitivity to the community and saw also the community voices, a council that wasn't diverse, it became diverse in the city of Los Angeles. So a lot of good has come out of what transpired in terms of revolt. We have a letter dated July 2nd from the NAACP supporting this. We have another letter dated June 29th from, again, WOCC. Also, we have a letter from the mayor of the city of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, who also support us commemorating, who's also joining in the festivities. Potentially will bring the President of the United States down to our community to commemorate this historic day that transpired in 1965, although it may have a negative effect in terms of what transpired. But now people's voices will no longer be overlooked. People's concerns are now being confronted. Investments has transpired in the community and will continue to do so. And so I'm asking this committee to support this resolution so we can take this back to our community so that we can commemorate what has transpired. It is not to advocate for what transpired in terms of rioting and things of that nature. 34 people was lost. Over $40 million was in property damages. We're not talking about that. I think we have learned, people of Watson, I believe Los Angeles have learned in a lot of ways not to repeat what has transpired in the past.
Yeah, and I understand the things that you listed. I would almost rather this resolution be about all those things, because those were the positive things that, those were the correct responses, right? But, the riot itself, I think, was not a good response. And that, as you said, it led to deaths. It led to, I think you put in here, $40 million worth of property damage. Not everybody that was participating in this was doing so because of Prop 14. I think what happened here was, it was criminal what was done to people's rights were violated, and it wasn't the correct way to do things. What happened in Baltimore was not the correct way to respond, and I think we shouldn't be. That's my concern. Is I don't want to celebrate that response. I want to celebrate the things you talked about.
Right, and we are.
And I think that should be really the focus. So that's my concern.
Additional questions or comments? All right. I'll just take. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Garcia.
So I don't think this resolution is celebrating the riots. I think that the riots gave forth a discussion and a catalyst to actions, and I think the resolution is celebrating or advocating for constructive ways to use that energy in a peaceful manner, to redirect that energy for positive change. And I think it's acknowledging that while there has been progress in society, we still have some of the systemic injustices in our system along the way, and it's continuing that dialogue forward. And so it's part of the history. It's wrapped up there, and it created a conversation. So we can't ignore that these riots and their significance in our history. And so I don't think that's what's being celebrated. I think the actions afterwards is what we're celebrating in this resolution.
That is correct.
Thank you. If the resolution went in, and I mean, I know it mentions the Martin Luther King Hospital and whatnot. But I'd be much more comfortable with it, as my colleague Mr. Gallagher said, if we were talking about the great things going on in the community now. And I mean, the sense I get of this is like, we had a riot, great things came of it, let's see if maybe the next riot something good can come of that as well. And that is just, nowhere we need to go. We've got, I mean, this is a key moment in California history. So was the Rodney King riot. Will we be celebrating that next? So was the Zoot Suit riot. Where's the resolution on that? You say we're not celebrating riots. We are. We're just calling them a revolt. The thing to celebrate, as you've mentioned, and you've done as good a job, you've done a better job selling this than I thought you could do. What I will say, though, is what's to be celebrated in my mind is the gentleman sitting next to you and his family. Bring us a resolution that says, here was a beacon of hope when others in our community were doing $40 million of damage to our own community. Here was somebody who provided shelter. Here was a family that didn't succumb to the savagery, but in fact was the place where we went for help. And look at what this family's continued to do for 50 years. That's the resolution, in my mind, we ought to be bringing and celebrating. I just don't, personally, I don't think you're there and can't support this resolution at this point. Seeing nothing else, you may close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair. Again, this resolution, with all due respect, talks about we cannot move forward unless we reflect back on our past. And what came out of this revolt was great things. And I believe that residents of Los Angeles, we recognize what transpired, and we're moving forward towards a bright future. We're writing a new chapter and have written a new chapter as it relates to the history of Watts of Los Angeles. And so this resolution, it embodies what transpired. There's no mistaking about what transpired. And if we could, change the hands of time, we would make sure this doesn't take place, but still have the result where we have businesses, we have an institution of health care that's provided and that bears the name of Dr. Martin Luther King. We have a higher institution of education, Cal State University, Dominguez Hills. We have a police commission in the city of Los Angeles now where people can go and lodge their concerns with respect to injustices they may see or have been confronted with. We have all these things that have transpired that came out of this situation. And sometimes bad has to come in order for good to rise above. And what we're simply saying is that we cannot forget about what transpired to move us to a place where we can have a conversation about indifferences, about injustices. And I believe that this resolution talks and bring people together in the Watts community to celebrate the 50th years that what transpired and how we're moving forward and how we're prospering as a community. And so I would respectfully ask this body for an aye vote so that we can move forward. And when the president comes, and that may not be well received by some people, but when the president comes, that we can all share together. This will also bring generations upon generations to coming out, as well as descendants of the 34 people who've lost their lives, who've yet to be mentioned and chronicled in any of our literature or any records in Los Angeles. And so this seeks to do just that. I'll ask for aye vote.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Call the roll.
Stone? Aye. Stone, aye. Wagner?
No.
Wagner, no. Alejo? Chow? Chu? Chu, aye. Gallagher? Garcia? Garcia, aye. Holden? Holden, aye. Mainshine? O'Donnell? O'Donnell, aye.
It needs one more, so we'll put the resolution on call.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, that brings us to item 6, SB 501, Senator Wachowski.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. Nice to be before the Assembly Judiciary again. SB 501, which is before you, is about allowing low-income workers in California to keep a little more of their paychecks in order to meet the basic needs without reducing the total amount of debt that they own. The total amount of the debt that they owe does not go away. It just pays it back at a slower rate. With the amendments that I'm prepared to accept today, I've worked diligently with advocates, understanding concerns that have been voiced. I think the bill is even better at focusing on the workers who are struggling to get by. I don't know if it satisfies any of the opposition that has been voiced on this. As all of you will do with difficult legislations, you try to find a middle ground that's helpful. You compromise. You take something back, and I don't know if it's satisfactory for the opposition that you'll hear from later. SB 501 accomplishes the goals of erasing crushing wage garnishments in three important ways. First, it eliminates the disincentive for workers facing garnishment to start earning more than the minimum wage. Second, it reduces the unmanageable high percentage of income taken from low-income workers' paychecks. And third, it respects the local minimum wage laws that were voted on and approved at the local level. An unintended result of our current wage garnishment formula, which I was the author of, is that a worker earning just over the state minimum wage, that is, they're making $10 an hour, $11 an hour, and $12 an hour, every single additional dollar that they earn is taken from her paycheck, and then she's knocked back down to the $9 per hour. This bill addresses that. This is the case even in communities that have enacted a higher minimum wage because they believe that people living in their jurisdiction should be compensated at a higher level. This undermines local decision-making, and SB 501 fixes that problem also. As amended, SB 501 bases the garnishment percentage on the worker's weekly paycheck. This repay-as-you-earn structure will help protect families who have been struggling to hold things together. Currently, workers who have been already living paycheck to paycheck are currently going without essentials like groceries and medicine. Bills and rents cannot be paid on time, and consequently, some families are being pushed on public assistance. This bill ties the garnishment rate to the worker's income so that creditors who are here and will testify are still getting paid off in full, but not at the cost of destabilizing low-income workers and families in the state of California. Here with me is Dr. Prasad Krishnamurthy. He's an economist and a professor at the UC Berkeley School of Law, and Jessica Bartholow with the Western Center on Law and Poverty. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Your first witness, please.
Thank you, committee, for hearing me. I'm Prasad Krishnamurthy. I'm assistant professor of law at UC Berkeley School of Law. I'm a lawyer and also an economist. So I want to reiterate a point that Mr. Wachowski made. It's a broad principle of policies that are intended to help low-income workers that it should not punish those workers by making it harder on them to earn additional income. And unfortunately, the structure of California's garnishment exemption, as well as federal law with respect to garnishment exemptions, does exactly this. Under the current law, the first $360 a worker makes a week, so that's $9 an hour times the 40-hour week minimum wage, is exempted from garnishment. But thereafter, every additional dollar that you would earn would be subject to garnishment. This acts as a 100% marginal tax on additional earnings. This is a strong disincentive for any worker in that vicinity of the minimum wage to try to seek any additional earnings. So this is from about $360 a week to $480 a week. That's a 30% increase from the minimum wage. The number of workers approximately that are within that range of the minimum wage is about 15 to 20% of our workforce. This is an enormous number of workers who, if they were faced with a garnishment, would be subject to this disincentive. The proposed bill changes this, and it changes this by saying, okay, for every additional dollar you earn above $360, the garnishment would be 30%. So 30% of every additional dollar over $360 would go to pay your creditor, and that would eliminate this disincentive. This is an important piece of legislation, and it's an area in which California, if we were to adopt this, it would be something that other states could follow, because right now this penalty is in place for all the 50 states. I'd like to address two concerns that I've heard that are criticisms of the proposal. One of those is that, look, low-wage workers don't really face this 100% marginal rate because they have the ability to file a claim with a court that says that the garnishment is too high for them. This sort of objection confuses the existence of a legal right with its sort of practical enforcement. If you're a low-income worker and you get a garnishment, you are not generally in a position to understand that you have a legal claim that you can file with the court, find a lawyer to get that claim filed for you, or find legal aid to do so. Our legal aid offices do a lot of work trying to help low-income workers, but in a given year in California, several 100,000 workers within 33% of the minimum wage will find themselves in this situation. Our courts are simply not processing those claims at that rate, and so this existence of the legal right is practically not available for most of the workers in this situation. The second objection that I have heard to this bill is that it would give too much lenience or too much debt forgiveness to high net worth, high income individuals who are now not going to be able to escape paying their debts. This is not the case. So under the proposal that we've put in front of you, once you earn $60,000 a year in disposable income, you're going to be garnished at a 20% rate. Thereafter, above 60%, it's going to continue to increase and eventually get to 25%. And none of this affects the amount of money that a debtor owes. You still have to pay it back in full. If you're someone who is earning, say, $100,000 a year, you're garnished at a 24% rate. It doesn't mean that you don't have to pay 1%. That 1% you don't have to pay. It just means that your payments are smaller over time. Your creditor can still get post-judgment interest on that. So that means you have to pay 10% interest on it for being able to pay it over a longer period of time. And if you're actually a creditor and you've got someone who's making $100,000 a year and you have a wage garnishment against them, you'd like them to pay it off as slowly as possible, because you're definitely going to get paid back from those wages, and you're going to get paid back at 10%. That's almost risk-free. It's the same reason why credit card companies love it when you check minimum payment on your credit card payments and you're a high-income individual. Just paying back over a slower period of time is 10% post-interest in the hands of a creditor. So neither of these two objections seem to me to be terribly strong with respect against the idea that this is going to provide a great amount of relief for low-income workers, and it's going to remove a substantial penalty that the current exemption places on them in terms of their ability to earn any additional wages. Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Jessica Bartholow with the Western Center on Law and Poverty. First and foremost, I want to thank you, Chair, and your staff for working with us for a very thorough analysis, and we thank you for that. Also, thank you to the Vice Chair for taking my request for a personal meeting. I appreciated our conversation, as always, and your thoughtfulness on the decisions you make today. So Western Center on Law and Poverty, you know us here in the Capitol because we work on legislation pertaining to public benefits and housing rights and access to affordable housing for low-income people. But more and more, we're seeing we're being pulled into the work of advocating for low-income workers, and that's because over 70% of low-income Californians live in a working home. And the people who are coming to our legal services centers are asking for help for public benefits, but oftentimes the public benefits aren't able to help them with the problems they have paying their rent or affording basic needs for their children, getting their kids to school, because the problems lie in their work environment. Either they're unable to maintain stable work, or when they do have stable work, the wages that they bring home aren't sufficient. We know that this legislature, this body, has done a great deal this year and previous years to make life more livable and sustainable for working families, but still we have the most unequal state in the country. And over 70% of low-income families being from working homes is not acceptable, I know, for either the Republicans or the Democrats in this building. So appreciate your work on this. The first time I had a call about a wage garnishment issue was actually right outside in this hallway, and I won't ever forget it. It was a mother who was calling on behalf of her daughter who was in college. She was a low-income mom. She was on SSI. She was so proud of her daughter who got a scholarship, but also had to pay for college in order to be there. And she was at state college. Her wages were being garnished. They were being garnished because of an overpayment, an accidental overpayment made by a worker on a public benefit case from previously when her daughter was a child. We were able to fight back, the outcome of that case because the garnishment and the debt was illegal to be seized from her as an adult from when she was a child. But the impact of that garnishment, we weren't able to act fast enough. The garnishment meant that she had to take out additional debt and had to take a semester off of college. This is our best and brightest, out there trying to make her way. And a garnishment, even for the period of time, a short period of time before her mother reached out to us, was enough to be able to destabilize her ability to proceed for a while. And in fact, it resulted in debt that is burying her now as she tries to find employment, recently graduated. These are the kinds of stories we're seeing every day. Our law centers are not prepared to help all the time. We have East Bay Community Law Center here as a co-sponsor of this bill, and they have the resources, many of the urban areas do, to be able to put together a consumer legal services unit, but a lot of the rural areas do not, and less affluent areas do not. And so what that means, I was just actually in Orange County at the legal services there, and they refer people to the court. And when you go to the court to file a waiver from your wage garnishment, there's an English form, and there's a little section in Spanish that says that if you don't speak English, you can ask a friend or a family member for a translation for the 2-page court format. So, so it is a misnomer to think that because this waiver is an option for people in the law, that it's actually an option for people in reality. All of these folks who are being garnished their wages are working. I spoke to one gentleman who was a taxi driver, and he didn't have. He'd never been to court. It scared him to go to court. He was a refugee, and he didn't have the time to go even if he could. So this policy, what it really does is to help bring California up to par with the rest of the states, to have a lower garnishment rate, help families take home more of their wages that they earn, spend them in their communities, and generate economic activity where we need it here in California. I urge your aye vote, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Next witness, please.
Just briefly, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members. Ted Merman from the East Bay Community Law Center in strong support of the bill. This will make a real difference for our low-income clients.
Thank you.